cells that have kind of gone wild. And so we're actually forming cancers in our body all the time. And when somebody asks me why did they get cancer at whatever age they're at, like I try to have a compassionate response to them. And you certainly don't want to make people feel like they're to blame. But as a researcher, when I'm done with that individual patient, I'm walking by myself, I started to ask the question, why don't we get cancer more often? And in fact, we actually do get cancer all the time. And getting cancer means normal cells that are dividing, copying, pasting, which is why we're still around today from yesterday and we'll still be around tomorrow, makes mistakes. And when you have those mistakes, you have mutations, and mutations really are the kind of the bud, the foundational bud of developing a cancer in the future. So an interesting thing that has been worked on is how many DNA mistakes does a typical adult make? The answer is 10,000 mistakes are made every 24 hours. So in theory, we actually are laying track for these little microscopic abnormalities that can turn into cancers, but they don't turn into cancers, most of them, because we actually have defenses in the body, like our immune system, like our ability to prevent blood vessels from growing into them. We've got lots of hardwired mechanisms that prevent cancer. So people who wind up dying from non-cancer causes get an autopsy to figure out what actually happened. And they're, in an autopsy, you look at every tissue. Pathologist, a specialist in looking at tissues, either in life or death. And some startling statistics appear. So it turns out that between the ages of 40 and 50, autopsy studies of women show that about 40% of women actually already have breast cancer, microscopic breast cancers that are far lower than what you would be diagnosed with. And most of those women are not going to go on to develop breast cancer. It's just that if you look for them, you might find them. So something about the environment of the breast, the microenvironment, and then lifestyle can actually take something that could be harmful that actually doesn't wind up being harmful for men. Between the ages of 50 and 60, 50% of men have prostate cancers. Silent cancers in the prostate most likely won't ever become a prostate cancer that's going to kill you or be dangerous, but they're there. And then, in people who are 70 and older, almost 100% of people will have thyroid cancers, microscopic thyroid cancer. So what I'm trying to communicate is that cancer is not the disease we always thought it was. It's like being jumped in an alleyway, like where all of a sudden you were just by yourself and all of a sudden, somebody springs out and grabs you. Not like that. Yeah. It's this long development with a lot of complicated things going on in your body, genetics playing only part of the role that we used to think about. And now we're beginning to really explore lifestyle choices, cumulative exposures. And, that's probably in that bag, that black box is where we're going to find some of the answers to the trend of having cancers being diagnosed at a younger age.
So soy, great source of dietary protein, plant-based food, got dietary fiber in it. And it's got bioactives that are isoflavones, of which one of those isoflavones, the class of chemicals, actually is a plant-based phytoestrogen. And well-intentioned people who once heard that some forms of human breast cancer are sensitive to human estrogen naturally made the connection that maybe soy would be harmful to eat because it's got a phytoestrogen. But if you're a researcher like me, and you know something about chemistry, and you were to call up onto a screen or a book or do a Google search and look for human estrogen and look at phytoestrogen, and just even look at the chemical structures, they look nothing alike. And in fact, what is true is that plant estrogens, phytoestrogens from soy, don't actually mimic human estrogen. It blocks human estrogen. It's kind of Mother Nature's tamoxifen, which was a drug designed to block human estrogen. So the real question is whether or not soy is a good cancer fighter. Yes, it blocks human estrogen for estrogen-responsive cancers, number one. Number two, these phytoestrogens, one of them is called genistein. I've done research on this, potently starves cancer by cutting off the blood supply. So now you're boosting your body's own ability to starve a cancer so it can't grow. Now, if you're a skeptic, you might say, prove it to me. I know no woman is going to want to eat tofu or drink soy milk just on an anecdote. Well, how about this? A study called the Shanghai Breast Cancer Study looked at 5,000 women who are at the highest risk for breast cancer. Why? Because they already have breast cancer, super high risk. Okay.
Yeah.
And it found that those women who consumed the most soy, about a cup of soy milk a day, 10 grams of soy protein a day, had a 30% decreased risk of dying of their breast cancer. That's mortality. So the complete opposite of the fear factor is the empowerment factor. This actually lowers death. Now, for those women who already had their breast cancer successfully treated and don't want it to come back, there were some women in this study who had that. Those women who ate more soy also had a 20 to 30% less chance of having their cancer recur. That's secondary prevention. Social media is filled with skeptics out there. They're like, well, you just cherry picked this one study. What about the study? Well, I could name 14 consecutive studies looking at soy intake and breast cancer. And in every single case, higher consumption of soy did not increase mortality. Rather, higher consumption of soy decreased mortality, decreased the risk of death. 14 consecutive studies. Tomatoes are an incredible source of an anti-inflammatory bioactive vitamin C, great for hydration. They are packed with carotenoids that are very important and useful for healthy aging, healthy vision. And one of those carotenoids, natural compound called lycopene, has been studied, and it has a powerful cancer-starving effect. This was studied in men. So earlier we talked about women and soy. Let's talk about men and tomatoes. There was the Harvard study called the Health Professionals Follow-On Study, looked at 36,000 plus men over 2 decades. I'm talking about a long study. And they looked, as in these large studies, for consumption of specific foods and to see about any association with particular diseases. Well, we've known for years that lycopene can cut off the blood supply feeding cancer. And so they looked at lycopene intake and prostate cancer and found that those men in this study who had 2 to 3 servings of cooked tomatoes per week had a 30% decreased risk of developing prostate cancer. And don't forget the vitamin C, antioxidant, lowers inflammation, all beneficial as well. Now, the other thing that's interesting is if only 30% lower risk, some people did develop prostate cancer. They dug into those people as well. Those people who ate more cooked tomatoes and had prostate cancer had less aggressive, less vascularized, less blood vessel fed cancers. So it's a pretty tight connection between eating tomatoes and a lower risk of prostate cancer. You want to make the tomato work better? You combine it with extra virgin olive oil because the lycopene dissolves in oil. And so that's why when you actually slow simmer a tomato sauce, you wind up getting more lycopene into your bloodstream. Apple a day is supposed to keep it the doctor away. Turns out that there is a potent bioactive polyphenol in apples called chlorogenic acid. It is a super potent anti-inflammatory substance found in the flesh of apples that when we eat it, really helps to lower our inflammatory biomarkers. And the fiber in apple feeds our gut microbiome, which then produces the short chain fatty acids that further lowers inflammation. I love berries, right? So berries is not one food. It's really a diverse bandolier of foods. Blackberries, blueberries, raspberries, strawberries, all of them are colorful. And the color that the common denominator, natural dyes, are anthocyanins in many of the berries, including lingonberries and all these gooseberries. And anthocyanins tame blood vessels to make them healthier because they're good for cardiovascular, but they also cut off the blood supply to cancers. They're also incredible antioxidants to protect DNA from damage. And also there are fiber in berries. Like most people don't know this, but raspberry, which, you get a handful of raspberries, you wash them off, they're hollow, they almost float, almost like lightweight, like airy. They are pound for pound the most fiber-rich berry food out there, and it feeds the gut microbiome, which then lowers inflammation. So think about these individual microscopic cancers as seeds. They're not good seeds, they're bad seeds.
Okay.
And they're sitting in soil. So the seed in the soil patches its idea of cancer living in its own fertile soil. And what happens around the soil can affect the growth of the seed. So inflammation is basically feeding the seed. It's watering and fertilizing the seed, the bad seed, in a way that allows it to begin sprouting roots, establishing itself, and growing into what you don't want it to grow into. Now, remember, inflammation is actually normal and healthy. So it's the chronic inflammation that's actually stoking the growth. What does it do to the seed? Why does inflammation do that? So this seed is always trying to establish itself by releasing its own fertilizer. They call them growth factors. They're peptides and proteins. And right now in the whole biohacker longevity space, there's like a big enthusiasm about peptides. Well, I can tell you, because I study peptides, growth factors, they're hormones and they're signals that one cell produces that triggers a cellular signal with another cell to tell the other cell to do something. And so too cancers also release these growth factors. At a low level, you put inflammation around that seed, that bad seed, and suddenly the inflammation enables the microscopic cancer to produce more growth factors. And in fact, indeed, the inflammatory cells that will start to gather around, kind of like hover around this little tiny dormant cancer, once harmless, the inflammatory cells themselves will dump more cytokines, growth factors. Now, we remember cytokines from the COVID era. They cause inflammation. They cause all kinds of stress reactions. Now you're dumping this around the cancer. All right. Your normal cells don't like it. They're like, you know what? This is not comfortable for me. But the cancer's like, bring it on, baby. I want to get these growth factors. Thank you for the fertilizer. Now it's time for me to take off. We all have been out, hopefully, to enjoy beautiful weather under the sun. You get a sunburn, you get inflammation. We know the skin gets red, blisters, it's terrible. That's inflammation. You do that over and over and over again. That radiation from the sun is mutating the cells. You keep on burning yourself. You're setting out inflammation. That's how a small microscopic abnormal skin cell that turns cancerous can suddenly become a melanoma or a non-melanoma skin cancer. So that's an example of where normal goes to abnormal, non-inflamed goes to inflamed, and boom, it's like pulling a trigger to force it, to stoke it to go into cancer. Let's give another couple of examples that people might understand. People who drink a lot of alcohol can have acid reflux. Alcohol can relax the sphincter at the end of our esophagus, relaxing the opening to the stomach. And stomach acid can splash up, and you can wind up having esophagus burns. All right. Esophagitis is what we call it. It's a severe form of heartburn. Once in a while, if we have it, we all have heartburn every now and then. Not a big deal. You drink a lot of alcohol and you wind up having a lot of heartburn. Over time, you wind up having chronic inflammation in your esophagus. And because the stomach acid can cause an injury and damage and cause mutations, now you've got normal esophagus going to abnormal, the splash. Now you've got non-inflamed to inflamed, and that can trigger off the growth of esophageal cancer or esophageal stomach cancer, really deadly type of cancer.